fais 1, 2, 1, 2, juste pour voir.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Il faut vraiment parler dedans.
Ouais, parfait.
En fait, si tu te mets là, par exemple, là, il est activé.
Ouais, ça va. Ok. C'est bien, ça veut dire qu'on peut parler aussi discrètement.
C'est ça. On le met peut-être.
Ouais.
Ok. Je sais pas trop quel arbitrage on fait. Est-ce qu'on se dit à 18h10 on commence?
Je pense qu'à 10 on peut aller le chercher.
Ouais, on va chercher. Et attends, Arthur, est-ce qu'on se met un repère, genre, pour se dire, il faut à 30 minutes de la conf, on soit là?
Ah ouais, pas con. Faut qu'on soit à la fin du cours. À la moitié. Ah bah non, en fait, faut qu'on soit à la fin du cours 1, 30 minutes.
Ouais, c'est ça.
Donc 40.
Donc à partir du moment où c'est quoi la première question? Ah oui, c'est moi qui l'a prise. C'est sur le awareness. Okay.
Et si je vois que c'est trop long, j'en skip une des miennes.
C'est pas une minute?
Non, j'ai un
C'est ton
téléphone.
calme. Faut regarder de temps en temps, quoi. Ouais. Quand même, je suis contente. Ça va.
Tu peux le retirer peut-être.
Ah ouais, enlève-le. Hein.
Ouais, faut jouer un peu avec les réglages.
Hortense qui a acheté tout le cocktail. Ouais.
Ah, peut-être.
Ouais, on y va, on l'amène?
Ouais.
Allez, c'est parti.
Je dis 10.
Ouais, on y va.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Good evening, sir. On behalf of the entire Esp'R Student Association, I would like to thank you for coming here all the way to Jouy-en-Josas, France, to speak with us. Before you start to discuss with Arthur and Mary, I will shortly introduce your career and how you came to join the Club of Rome. First, you attended the Polytechnic University of Madrid, of which you graduated in 1985 with an engineering degree, focused on aerospace, aeronautical, and astronautical engineering. You started your career by becoming a lecturer and researcher in applied mathematics at that same university, and then you became an entrepreneur in the digital sector all throughout Europe. In 2006, you founded the Innaxis Foundation and Research Institute, which focuses on research on complex systems and holistic frameworks for new sustainability paradigms, as well as applied research in innovation, transport, mobility, health, and life sciences. You joined the Club of Rome in 2017, and you became a member of the executive committee. You subsequently became vice president in 2022, and now you have been secretary general since January 2024. For those of you who don't know, the Club of Rome was founded in 1968. It is a non-profit, informal organization of intellectuals and business leaders whose goal is a critical discussion of pressing global issues. At the group's first major gathering in 1970, MIT professor Jay Forrester offered to use his computer models to study the complex problems concerning the group more rigorously. So an international team of MIT researchers then began a study on the implications of unrestrained exponential growth, focusing on the 5 factors that determine and ultimately limit growth on Earth: population, agricultural production, non-renewable resource depletion, industrial output, and pollution. The Club of Rome is well known for its first major report from 1972, entitled The Limits to Growth, and also known as the Meadows Report. The report sold millions of copies worldwide and created a lot of media controversy. This call for objective scientific assessment of the impact of humanity's behavior and use of resources still defines the Club of Rome today. While the report had many messages, it fundamentally confronted the unchallenged paradigm of continuous material growth and the pursuit of endless economic expansion. 50 years later, there is no doubt that the ecological footprint of humanity substantially exceeds its natural limits every year, and so the concerns of the Club of Rome have not lost their relevance. Thank you.
Thank you again for being here with us tonight. My first question will be this one. You've been a member of the club since 2017. Do you remain optimistic despite the series of alarming reports that you've participated to publish? And generally, what's your state of mind regarding the situation?
Well, optimism or pessimism is a characteristic of the personality, right? It's not so related with the data you have, you know. Interestingly enough, we don't necessarily react to data or facts. So, but in this case, I mean, we will speak about different Italian authors, one of them the founder of the Club of Rome. I will use the expression from another Italian thinker, Antonio Gramsci, who said, well, against the pessimism of the intelligence, I choose the optimism of the will. So this is pretty much my approach, you know, the optimism of the will.
Thank you very much. This weekend, French farmers placed a spray of flowers under the Arc de Triomphe to commemorate their colleagues who committed suicide. 30% more suicides occur among farmers than among the rest of the French population. Compulsory fallow land, 4% of their fields, tax increases on non-road diesel fuel, pesticide standards. We haven't wondered whether the objectives for 2030 are achievable, said President of COPA. What feelings cross your mind? Are we asking too much to put our conscience at ease?
It's not a matter of too much. It's not a matter of quantity. Is that we are I think, not doing the right things, which is quite different. The exercise of, in the Club of Rome, we think that what we are talking about is a shift in civilization. That's the order of magnitude, if you wish, of what we are talking about. It's a complete reinvention of our relationship among humans and with nature. And this is a shift in civilization. If only you want to take only one aspect, which is the energy transition in the history of humankind, every time humans have changed their main source of energy, that meant a change in civilization. So this is of this order of magnitude. Now, the point is, how do we, first, many people would not agree with what I just said, you know, and they think that it can be done through technical adjustments or a combination of technology, business, and regulations. And then that it can be decided with top-down strategies. So when people feel that the EU Green Deal is something technocratic, I'm sorry, they are right. I mean, we cannot do this without the people. We cannot, this is not an exercise, and I know that the Club of Rome has the reputation of being, you know, we are a small group of people, 140 members from all around the world, but an elite for sure, and we have a little bit the reputation of being, you know, behind the scenes thinking the right policies, etc. But our thinking is that we need to engage with people,
yes,
from people.
But what do you respond to these farmers who are on the field?
But they have, my response is that they have a big point. I mean, my response is that we have to trust people. Basically, what did not happen since 1972 until now is that society has not learned its way to have an ecological civilization, to find a balance between human well-being and the planetary boundaries. And we have not learned because we have not bet on the capacities of all humans to learn. We have not trusted humans to learn. We have continued with the same kind of mental frameworks of development in the way it was defined, and it is still defined, and creating mental jails for people at all levels, including at the level of the elites. The elites, many of those know perfectly well what is happening, but they are in their own mental jails, which of course for them are golden jails. And so it's a human revolution, what we need. It's a revolution of mindsets.
For a long time, you were preaching alone in the desert. In 1972, the Meadows report drew immediate criticism. Researchers claimed that MIT's methodology, data, and projections were wrong. Experts at the OECD, the parent organization of the Club of Rome, dissociated themselves from the report. With the 1973 oil crisis and the resulting unemployment, long-term thinking seemed to be out of fashion. Growth remained the only compass for many years. For a long time, you preach alone in the desert, but today, ecology is something nobody can avoid. So have you won?
And lost at the same time. Life is a permanent contradiction. But to come back to what happened, it was a bit more complex than that. Because we had big, huge success. The Limits of Growth, I don't know how many of you have read the book, but it's not a thriller, you know, it's not one of those novels that you cannot stop reading, no. But it sold millions of copies. We don't even know exactly how many, you know, but maybe 10 or 15 millions of copies. Big, big, big success. And it changed the debate, the public debate, definitely in Europe, but also in the US. At the time when Jimmy Carter was president, He was listening to this. So feeling was, oh, big success. Then there was the backlash. The backlash particularly by mainstream economics, who couldn't understand, you know, something based on questioning growth. I mean, growth is like the core of mainstream economics. And then that backlash was very effective also in describing the book as something that it was not. And it was not a prophecy, a doomsday prophecy. It was not a prophecy. It was not predictions. But the framing of the book by the people who wanted to reject the book was very effective to say, no, these guys, don't listen to these guys, they are doomsdayers, you know. So, of course, we can see that the influence today is much stronger, the influence not of the Club of Rome as such, but of the ideas of the Club of Rome is much stronger than it was 50 years ago. But we could have learned more in the process. So in a way, we won and we lost at the same time, and we have some ideas about why that happened.
Thank you.
So we're going to delve deeper into the subject of changing civilization a bit later, but we'd first like to focus on how to reinvent an economic system, which is necessary, and that was the topic of our first questions. But do you think you have your current vision of the economic world and all its surroundings is still the same as in the 1972 Meadows report, and in terms of science, economics, and outlook on the future? Have you evolved your perception?
Well, first of all, I have to clarify that the Club of Rome doesn't have one position. It's not our work, you know. We are not the holders of any truth. We are, since the very beginning, by construction, a space of debate ourselves. Very open to a multiplicity of perspectives. In a way, what the Club of Rome does is to say, well, these are topics which seem important, right? And so elaborating, putting the agenda is already taking a position, of course. But within that agenda, we have a high diversity of opinions, you know. So in the 70s, we didn't propose a particular school of economic thought. And we don't do that now either. Within the Club of Rome, there are a big number of my colleagues are economists or economic thinkers, but different schools, you know. You have ecological economics, you have feminist economics, you have well-being economics, you have multiplicity of perspectives. What we did 2 years ago, it started even 3 years ago, 3 years and a half ago, is to initiate a debate with a commission of economic thinking for the 21st century. Among them and people who are not in the Club of Rome, who are not members of the Club of Rome, and work on the question, what would be a consistent set of policies to make human well-being, equitable human well-being for all, compatible with the planetary boundaries. And there was part of reflection and debates and controversies, and there was part also of building a model specific to that question. And all that led to a book which we published 2 years ago, Earth for All. So if you want to know what kind of ideas we are working on, many of them are not leading edge ideas in the field of economics, because we are building from what other people are doing. Kate Rayworth is one of our members, and Bob Constanza in the space of well-being economics, ecological economics, etc. Kate Pickett in the space of inequality. That book, Earth for All, signals 5 that we call things that we call turnarounds, which doesn't start in economics. The 5 areas of where we think policies could be implemented to make possible well-being and a healthy planet that starts with empowerment of women, energy transition, regenerative agriculture, tackling inequality, and ensuring human development for those countries who need that. So that's a little bit, but again, this is not written in stone. We're a space of debate. Unfortunately, I must say the evolution of mainstream economics has been much more dogmatic than that. At the same time that we say we are completely open to debate, mainstream economics has not been.
Talking about that, in an interview in 2022, Dennis Meadows, so the main scientist behind the limits to growth, said sustainable development is no longer possible. Do you think that is true? Can there be a physical growth without damaging the planet? And is sustainable development the right tool to achieve those 5 things you were talking about?
Well, first a clarification. Actually, the lead author of The Limits to Growth, with all respect and love for Dennis, was his wife. His wife at the time, Donella Meadows, who, I mean, you might have heard about her because she had a very interesting evolution in the space of systems thinking. And unfortunately, she passed away in 2002. But the very last article, by the way, that she wrote is titled Dancing with Systems. So she was really the lead author of that group. Dennis has this very pessimistic perspective. In many ways, he is right. I mean, how do I say this? It is too late to, but since long, it is too late to think that we can keep developing in the same manner. With this as a core of our model, the idea that to have human well-being, we have to have higher and higher levels of consumption per capita, meaning energy consumption. I'm not talking about CO2, climate change, etc. That's just one aspect of what we are talking about. Actually, the Club of Rome is not about ecological issues. The Club of Rome exists at the core of the Club of Rome. That's the question of human development. And if human development is possible for everybody in equitable conditions on Earth, within, of course, a healthy planet, within a healthy ecosystem. And we think it is possible, it is feasible. The book Earth for All shows that. It is doable, but it requires what the book calls a giant leap, which is a leap in policies. For instance, there is very interesting research going on the question of, but really if we want to provide decent levels of well-being for everybody on Earth, how much energy consumption would we need compared to what we consume today? Very interesting question, because there is always, I mean, we are sitting in a place which is, you know, in the privileged continent of Europe with high levels of well-being, high levels of consumption, and we have to think about most of the world. And most of the world, part of their aspiration is, oh, they want to live as well as we do, right? And so the anxiety comes from thinking, oh, we are consuming too much, but if we add what they need to consume more than today, we will not get it. Well, it depends, because the answer to that question of how much consumption do we need for decent living for everybody is, it depends critically on the levels of inequality. So at a much lower level of inequality, you know what is the response? That we can provide a decent way of living for everybody at half the level of energy consumption that we have today. So these are the questions that we have to address. And then, of course, immediately, yeah, but how do you realize this dramatic change in inequality patterns? You know?
And let's discuss that. HEC's Earth Week opened on Monday with a conference with Faris Barkat, a young French entrepreneur whose association empowers young people from the suburbs through ecology. And we discussed with him the very direct impact of his actions at a very local level. On the other side, the Club of Rome has always considered a very global scale. What do you think about it? What's the best scale for action? And do you think you have repercussions on what's happening?
Well, we have to work at all scales. So our reflection is, we don't know what will work. Many people are asking, what is your theory of change? It depends, we don't know, because until it works, we will not know what was the correct theory of change. And by the way, this is not an academic exercise. So we don't care about being wrong or right. We care about things changing, you know. And in that sense, what we see is that we have to combine not only different scales, but different strategies in the sense of trying to influence policy making, trying to influence the elites, trying to influence the multilateral system, the global scale, etc. And at the same time, pay attention to what is happening, because a lot of the solutions, I think, come from the ground, from communities or from entrepreneurs. I understand the person you received on Monday is a good case as an example of this, you know, of people who try to do something else. And you have incredible examples. Once you start paying attention, because these people are not in the media, these people are not the billionaires, are not the Elon Musks of this world, but they are doing a real revolution, human revolution in their own spaces by making that people leave their helplessness and hopelessness, you know. The worst that can happen is that to feel, oh, there is absolutely no solution, I cannot do anything. We have been inspired in the more recent years by the Black consciousness movement, which was born in South Africa exactly at the same time that the Club of Rome was created. Pure coincidence. It was created by a small group, maybe 15, less people than there is now here, 15, 20 young students in their 20s. And one of them was Steve Biko, and another one was Mampela Rampele, who has been co-president in the Club of Rome for the last 5 years. And they said, no, we have to move the lines of our mental jails. So the Black consciousness movement was, of course, a political movement against apartheid, but it was mainly a movement of self-liberation, mental self-liberation, and even saying that the oppressors, also the oppressors, have to liberate from their mental jails, you know. Very much inspired in pedagogies of liberation, Paulo Freire from Brazil, etc. Fascinating, you know, I mean, they were repressed, Steve Biko was assassinated, but those are the seeds which give me optimism about how we can change, you know, and there are plenty of examples around if we pay attention.
And do you think you have a role in helping these seeds grow? And do you achieve to do so?
I mean, we are trying. We are trying our best. Some of them are becoming members of the Club of Rome, not so far from here, just on the other side of the Strait of Gibraltar. Karima Kadawi, who has become recently a member of the Club of Rome, created 20 years ago something called the Tamkin Foundation for Human Development, doing incredible work with communities in Tangier. And now, so sometimes, you know, we think we have a lot to learn from other geographies, that we generally take for developing, you know, and so we think we are developed, we have the model of reference. Well, think again. The world, most of the world doesn't think that anymore. But then, not far away, Tangier, incredible experiences of human development in the sense of empowering communities, local communities, potentially changing now the whole educational system in Morocco. So yes, we are trying to put, at least to connect them with others, you know, because it's very important to connect them, and to try to understand what can be done to make these seeds, help these seeds flourish and disseminate, and I use the metaphor of pollination, because it's not one solution in one place and you take it and you scale it up, you know, which is something taught at business schools, you know, scaling up and reproducing that recipe millions of times from a central place. No, nature doesn't work that way. Life has its dissemination strategies, which we call pollination, you know. What would be the equivalent in society for that?
Excellent question. One last thing we'd like to address before switching to the second part of the conference on how to change minds and civilization is the fact that you have long been an entrepreneur and not always a thinker. As an aeronautical engineer, for example, you founded Innaxis, a data and AI research center for air transport. Do you think business has a role to play in all of this? How do you make the link? And also about technology. Will technology save us?
Technology will not save us, but don't take that as a headline. I mean, or you can take it as a headline, but I will explain. First, that we have to start making the difference between enterprises, in a wider sense of the term, of just business as we know it. We are very, very, very narrow-minded now. It's incredible how narrow is the mainstream, you know, thinking. So, for instance, if I say capitalism, markets, and businesses, or enterprises, we understand that it's all the same. Think again. Think again. It's not like that. You know, and the typical question is, oh, but then if you want something else, you are proposing communism, because the binary thing is capitalism, communism, and there is nothing in between, you know, or nothing else. So my take is that there might be very different kinds of enterprises. Markets and capitalism are at odds, actually. There is a basic contradiction between capitalism in the sense of rentier capitalism and markets. And Adam Smith knew that very well, or understood that very well. So we have to be better in saying, well, an enterprise as a group of people working for a certain purpose and being organized for a certain purpose, yeah, why not? This idea, I think, still makes a lot of sense. And it can be very different from many of the... To start with, we are putting in the same box the big multinationals and the small local enterprises and the startups, you know, as if they were the same animal. So I'm optimistic about the role of enterprise. I think it has to be questioned, and we are participating in the debate on what is a regenerative organization. What does it mean? You know, a regenerative economy, but in particular regenerative enterprises. And then the role of technology, we are pushing for the reframing of the role of science and innovation and technology. Actually, we participate with many other partners. We have promoted a declaration in August last year of the decade, the UN decade of sciences, all sciences, including traditional knowledge, for sustainable development. So we are promoting the idea that, yes, of course, science, innovation, and technology can be key to help in sustainable development, but only if we make them work in that direction, which is not the case today. The way they are framed today, they are not helping, because most of the efforts are going into accelerating the same trends to self-destruction. So let's flip the science model and the technology model to do that.
So you have to make people more aware. This is the goal. It's precisely this awareness that you are trying to propagate, right? So up until now, the Club of Rome has published over 50 reports, including one you edited, Limits and Beyond. We could compare the Club of Rome to other think tanks or research centers, such as the IPCC or the SHIFT projects. But who, today, Mr. Alvarez Pereira, reads IPCC reports? Who reads Club of Rome reports?
I don't know.
It's the elite? Is it?
I mean, what we try is, honestly, I mean, we have limited means, and let's be clear. We try to inspire others. So a big part of my time and the time of the team in the Club of Rome, the secretariat, goes into developing partnerships, coalitions of partners with which we feel we can do something, and trying to understand how collaboration between many different organizations can accelerate the changes, you know. So it's not so much anymore about how many books we sell. So for instance, Earth for All has sold reasonably well, but we are also in 2024, or we were when it came out in 2022. The role of books is completely different to compared to 50 years ago. And this is more about inspiring others, mobilizing energies, which goes often in other ways than through books. You know, it goes into building alliances and understanding.
Do you have examples?
Yeah, sorry?
Do you have examples of partnerships?
Well, we created a planetary emergency partnership in 2018, you know, to say, well, let's declare a planetary emergency with more than 200 organizations. Now, basically, we work in partnership. There was a big change in 2018, decide to not only go on our own, but partner with other organizations, including, in particular, universities, research centers. We are building up an Earth Humanity Coalition for this idea of reframing science for sustainability. And we have already 100 organizations, you know, scientific academies and unions and many other organizations. So we are now more in the mood of, if you wish, creating or catalyzing a very small organization, inspiring and catalyzing movements than selling books, than producing reports. So we also do that, and we try to influence as much as they leave us. We try to influence the political elites in the multilateral space, but also in the EU. Some of the ideas in the EU Green Deal, or the way the EU Green Deal has been transformed into policies, etc., came from reports that we produced for them. But I wouldn't even say this is the most important, because again, I think it's not the top-down approach, or not the top-down approach only, that will make the change. More catalyzing, inspiring people and catalyzing movements.
Okay. So precisely, we will talk about ecology and politics. Against the Green New Deal for Geert Wilders, against the Amazon for Bolsonaro, Argentine leader Javier Milei is very anti-ecology. Donald Trump has pulled out of the Paris agreements. They are the ones with the winds in their sails. Do you still believe that democracy can bring about profound change? And which leaders currently inspire you?
Which political leaders?
Yeah.
That one is a difficult question. Because several things are happening at the same time here. And biases in attributions are very frequent. Part of what we are seeing in the world is the realization by the West that we have lost the world. The world has escaped from us. The period of Western supremacy still very much there in many ways, but when you put a foot out of the West, out of the Europe and out of North America, especially if you go to Asia, you realize, oh, these people are not looking at us as a model, you know. So there is, and I think there is a sense of we are losing, you know, our supremacy, and a correct sense of that, because we are actually losing our supremacy, the Western world, and instead of reflecting on that and building up a new vision, also for ourselves, and betting on democracy, real democracy, what we do is to try to blame somebody. Blame somebody else. Blaming others is the very usual trick in politics since very long, but particularly in Western politics, you know. And we are becoming more and more aggressive. It's not the world which is becoming aggressive. This is a mutual relationship. So China is not becoming aggressive. It's the relationship between the US and China is going into a process of mutual mistrust, you know. And in this process of blaming, you know, it's relatively easy to say, oh, we are losing, you know, whether the farmers, well, they blame, you know, the green policies, because this is also part of the new. So I think we really have an issue of reinventing democracy from a democratic core. Again, the elites, the political elites in particular, complain about, oh, but people don't trust the institutions. Yeah, normal, because the institutions don't trust the people. Again, trust is a mutual relationship. So, and up to now, the only layer of thinking that has emerged in the institutional space is, so the EU, for example, the EU institutions realized that they did very bad in 2008 when the crisis of 2008, 2011 adopting, you know, austerity policies. They understood that led to huge social upheaval and mistrust and rise of populism. And they did something completely different with the pandemic, with the crisis of the pandemic, which is to produce money, basically. Put the money machine, you know, to make coming out of the pandemic in a very different way. But it's not enough. It's, again, this is a reductionistic version of, oh, but citizens are just homo economicus. They only care about economic incentives. No, people are people. You know, they want, in all their richness and their capacities that we are totally ignoring, and that our democracy, quote unquote, is still ignoring. So if I have to look for people I admire, it's people who are working on the ground. Typically, you don't get them on the big headlines or on TV, etc. The people who are working and leading, most often the ones I most admire are very humble people who are leading from humility their own communities and saying to them, we can do something different. We can reappropriate our future.
So you don't believe anymore in the top-down approach?
Sorry?
You don't believe in the top-down approach anymore? In the top-down approach?
No, it's not. Well, top-down approach by itself will not make it. Why? Because I mentioned before, the elites are also in their mental jails. I've told this anecdote many times already, and I will again, and it comes from something which was a public event. So there is a gentleman called Philip Hildebrand, who is the VP of BlackRock, largest asset manager in the world, participating in a conference in Geneva. And he said the following. The conference was about sustainable finance and the role of finance for sustainability. So appropriate to ask somebody like him about that, you know. And he said, he started saying, we recognize there is a lot of suffering, there is climate change, all these challenges are real, and they are creating a lot of difficulties, a lot of harsh times for people, plenty of suffering. And he said the following, which is really revealing of this situation of mental jails. He said, as a citizen, I could say many more things. But as VP of BlackRock, our fiduciary duty obliges us to say to our clients, so the pension funds, that they keep their investments in traditional assets, like fossil fuels, because the new assets, like renewables or circular economy and so on, are more risky than the traditional ones, unless the politicians change the framework conditions. So, declaration of total honesty, impotence, and cynicism all at the same time. And so, honesty, because I think he was really saying what he felt. Impotence, because, the VP of BlackRock can do nothing. You know?
It must come from politics.
But
from politicians.
No, he was the governor of the Swiss National Bank before that. But there is not so much difference between political and economic elites. Let's be clear in the world of today. And so where is the top-down way from a declaration like that? Because he's saying, unless politicians can change the framework conditions, which is total cynicism, because you are part of these elites who have been saying to politics, no, please don't intervene in the economy for so many decades, and you continued lobbying to avoid intervention by the political sphere. So the elites are stuck. Some of them, many more than we think, are aware. And of course, I couldn't ask, I didn't have the opportunity to ask him, because the most interesting thing of what he could have said is this: as a citizen, I could say many more things. Well, you as a human, Mr. Hildebrand, what do you think? So they are really stuck. And then we have to play a game of combining all scales, the top-down, but very much the emergence of the new, and also the shift, the cultural shift. And in that, part of my hope comes from the younger generations, you know, that the cultural shift, because politicians will not move until they realize, we have to move, you know, until they realize they lose the game if they don't change, you know.
So there is no political leader that you have faith in?
I mean, if you want me as a Spaniard, I'm very happy to live in Spain. I think we have it's funny because you get to a situation in which I think we have the best government we can have taken into account the circumstances. And I admire our prime minister, but not for his intellectual passion or his vision. He's definitely not a visionary. But as a politician in the modern times, which is a very peculiar, politics nowadays is a very peculiar sport, you know. And you end up, but it's our responsibility of all societies, because again, it's very easy to blame politicians. Look, I mean, we all have made politics what it is today, and the fact that typically not necessarily the best persons on earth end up in politics, you know.
Thank you.
And talking about that cultural shift, that civilizational shift, how do you think it will happen? Will it happen fast enough? And what are the means to change people's minds about economics, human well-being, and the ways to achieve them?
Well, fast enough for what?
To fight the climate urgency.
So fast enough to keep going as we are going? No way. I mean, to keep everything, because when people say we have no time, I always ask, no time for what? I mean, this is not the end of life on Earth. So if you worry about the planet, don't worry so much. The planet will do great without us. That we know. You know, we know when we create the conditions for restoration of ecosystems, it happens like that, you know. So the planet, don't worry, will survive. But it's not the end of humanity either. It's a lot of suffering already. So it's not when we organize a conference in Latin America in 2022 to listen to them. And do you know what they said? Yeah, very nice, Club of Rome. Yeah, thank you. But you are trying to prevent collapse. We live in collapse. That's what they said, you know. So the collapse is not something which will happen. It's already all around. So fast enough for keeping everything as it was, for keeping business as usual, no way. This is not an option. And then the point is, and that's what also science says about how life works. In critical conditions, and we are at a critical point, it is when the space of possibilities opens. It is when systems fail that there is a possibility of transformation. And that doesn't mean that, oh, don't worry, because through criticality we will get to something good. No, not guaranteed. It opens, you know, it's like, you know, a tree of possibilities of multiple bifurcating branches, but some of them are very ugly, and we are seeing them as well. So we already have all the elements of the collapse. I mean, and even not so far. Look at Ukraine, look at Gaza, etc. And then the point is, what do we learn from this situation of crisis? And do we move? It's a matter of level of learning, you know. At what level are you learning? Are we ready to move to reconnect? Because our thinking is that it's basically about reconnecting with our own humanity. And with the fact that we know since the beginning of times, but also from modern science, that actually the main factor for well-being and health is not material consumption. The main factor is relationships. So of course, you need certain levels of material conditions, you know, to keep alive, etc., etc. But then health and a good, and this is about redefining what is health, what is a good life. A good life is driven by the quality of your relationships with others, people, and nature, other living beings. We are relational beings. So it's at that level, at that deep cultural level, but that everybody can experience. And everybody, and the people who are overcoming these collapses, these crises, these terrible situations, one of our colleagues made the bet 20 years ago that all kids in South Africa have basically the same capacity. That the kids in the townships, in the poorest places of the country, deserve to have the same opportunities in life. And he created schools called LEAP schools to bring to those kids those opportunities, 20 years after, they have been able to consistently make that 85–90% of those kids go to university out of terrible situations. How? With this self-liberation. So it's a matter of how exposed you are to a critical situation, whether directly or you make the exercise. One of the things which happens is, to a large extent, we are talking about rather than living the collapse, But what can we learn from the collapse? And there are huge amount of resources that we can bring to this exercise of learning, and we can help the communities who are facing the collapse and then engage into this process of change, of collective change,
And I guess the emergence of new narratives is also important. It goes hand in hand with culture and creativity. And today we've asked you to bring us a text that you are moved by and that resonates with your vision of the world. What did you choose, and would you be willing to read it out loud?
Yeah, so I chose 2 books, actually, not one. But don't worry, it will not be long. One is this book, Before It Is Too Late, co-written by Aurelio Peccei, the founder of the Club of Rome. It was published the year he passed away in 1994. So this year is the 40th anniversary of the publication of this book. And the 45th anniversary of a publication of another report to the Club of Rome that nobody knows about, titled No Limits to Learning. And I recommend you that book and you can find it easily on the internet, because it says a lot about what we have been discussing, Build on the huge potential of people for learning. This one is written a few years later, and it's a dialogue between Aurelio and Daisaku Ikeda, a Japanese Buddhist philosopher, where they call for a human revolution. The human revolution I was mentioning behind. So already a few years after the Limits to Grow, they realized, we need something else to make change. So I will read a couple of paragraphs from this. Yes, maybe. So at the very end of the book, so it's a dialogue. Parts of the book are written by either one or the other, but large parts are a conversation, the transcription of a conversation. Aurelio Peccei says, I think in conclusion that the severity of our plight can no longer be denied, and that the warning we and others untiringly give about the extreme gravity of the global situation and trends and the absolute need to stop and reverse them must not be ignored. After making this premise clear, I want to reiterate with equally firm conviction that it is within our power to turn the tide. There can be no doubt that our generations, who are responsible for conducting human affairs at this historical juncture, possess all the knowledge and means to overcome the obstacles and negative circumstances that have made our situation difficult all over the world, and to reverse the downward drift of the human condition. And a bit later he says, all of us can contribute to avoiding these mistakes being made. And since the human revolution is the key to positive action leading to the adoption of a new course and the revival of human fortunes, we must do whatever is in our power to help set it in motion before it is too late. So that's, I think this is a really inspiring essay, which makes, you know, I think you will resonate with a lot of what is said, but it's also impressive, of course, that it was written 40 years ago. So all of that is still absolutely valid. And then, thanks for the invitation to that, because I thought, well, but I have to give something also with a little bit more of creativity. And I thought immediately of this book. This is the Spanish version by another Italian writer and poet, Italo Calvino, who died the year after Aurelio Peccei, although he was much younger, The Invisible Cities. And this book is a dialogue between Kublai Khan and Marco Polo. And Marco Polo describes all along the book, it's an imaginary dialogue, as you can, and he describes a lot of imaginary cities, the cities he has in mind. And I will read a couple of paragraphs from the very end. So Kublai Khan asks Marco Polo, "You who go about exploring and who see signs, can tell me toward which of these futures the favoring winds are driving us?" And Marco Polo replies, "For these ports, I could not draw a route on the map or set a date for the landing. At times, all I need is a brief glimpse, an opening in the midst of an incongruous landscape, a glint of lights in the fog, the dialogue of two passers-by meeting in the crowd, and I think that setting out from there, I will put together, piece by piece, the perfect city, made of fragments mixed with the rest, of instants separated by intervals, of signals one sends out, not knowing who received them." And then Kublai Khan is not completely convinced by that, and he says, it is all useless if the last landing place can only be the infernal city. And it is there that in ever narrowing circles the current is drawing us. And Marco Polo, this is how the book ends, the very last sentences. "The inferno of the living is not something that will be. If there is one, it is what is already here. The inferno where we live every day, that we form by being together. There are two ways to escape suffering it. The first is easy for many, accept the inferno and become such a part of it that you can no longer see it. The second is risky and demands constant vigilance and apprehension. Seek and learn to recognize who and what in the midst of the inferno are not infernal, then make them endure and give them space."
Thank you so much.
So basically, Aurelio Peccei and Italo Calvino were saying the same, but Calvino, of course, with a much more poetic stance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I will finish with this quote that I think resonates with what you chose. "The world will never starve for want of wonders, but only for want of wonder." It's Chesterton. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Wonder is a key concept. You know, the things which cannot be said with words. That would give for another conference. Huh? I mean, that could be the starting point for because in the end, what I really think is that the shift in civilization is a shift in meanings. And we all have what it takes. Remember Robert Kennedy saying, well, nothing of what makes life worth it is reflected in the GDP. And so what cannot be described with words, which are all the important things of life, love, is what has to drive us, not fear for the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alvarez Pereira. And now we will take the question from the audience.
No, it marche? Ah, okay, no, it's working now. Okay, awesome. No, thank you very much for the conference. It was really interesting. I agree with most of what you said during the entire time that you were here, but I kind of had an aha moment when you talked about the planet that would do great without us, because the planet in itself isn't a living being, right? It's not a living organism. It does host life, so the biosphere, but in itself, yeah, it'll survive, but if it's just a piece of rock, it doesn't have much meaning. And we do see that ecosystems bounce back pretty rapidly, but we also have generated a huge collapse of biodiversity in the past 50, 100 years. And it seems to me, as you were saying, that we should drive change because we want to survive as a species, right, as human species. But I think it's kind of still an anthropogenic point of view. And if we want to shift in civilization, I mean, in my point of view, we should also have a shift in how we view what value we see in organisms and plants, invertebrates, mammals, any type of living thing that's in between. Evidently, I'm not like ecocentric and think everything has the same value, but I don't think we should only drive change for human as species, but for other forms of life. And so I just wanted to have your clarification maybe on that.
Yeah, good question. I would argue with you that the planet is a piece of rock. When I say the planet, I'm talking about, if you wish, about Gaia, And well, it's a living being or not. What is a living being? I mean, we don't know actually. Our viruses. When we had the pandemic, we were talking about the intelligence of the virus. So not only viruses could be living beings, but also being intelligent. And then the border between what is living and not living is a bit confusing. So it looks like a rock is not alive. Think again, because not in all worldviews. I mean, for many worldviews that they wouldn't accept that. But also in our worldview, if you see how the winds bring the sand from the Sahara to the Amazon, you have to think again about the role of rocks in the process of life. They are part of it. So I was talking about life, if you wish, planet as life, and my point was, which is not an anthropocentric, my point was, if we don't take the anthropocentric view, no worries, life will survive us. Bacteria's, maybe what is happening is just a conspiracy by the bacterias, who have been, we are emergent properties from the bacterias, millions of years ago. I mean, not direct, there was something in the middle. But we are ourselves, each of us is an ecosystem. Without the zillions of bacteria who live in you wouldn't be living. You wouldn't be able to digest food. So if you don't take the anthropocentric view, no worries, this might be just an accident and we are committing suicide and we will disappear and life will continue and maybe create other species, So I'm taking the point of view of humans because we are humans, and I prefer, that we survive, that humanity survives, and as much of humanity as possible, so not in a tragic manner, you know, and we survive, all of us, we survive and we do well in symbiosis with the planet, with the Earth. This is why we call I mentioned the coalition before, you know, we called it, and it was a big discussion about how to call it. In the end, we called it Earth-Humanity Coalition. So the coalition of the Earth with humanity, or humanity with the Earth. And we are part of the Earth, of course, but we are for now, the nasty part of the Earth, you know.
You spoke about Latin America and about people that have the feeling to already live in a collapse. How do you think we can reach these people who are kind of trapped between like the effect of climate change and trying to survive, basically?
Well, for them, you know, what they have lived, what they received. I mean, Latin America is a very peculiar continent because you have a very high cultural diversity, also a very high level of biodiversity. And by the way, I don't know if you're aware, but a very small percentage of the total population of the world, basically the originary cultures, or the indigenous cultures, are the guardians of most of biodiversity on Earth. It's like 5% of the total population are taking care of 85% of the biodiversity, of the total biodiversity. But you have at the same time, so the originary cultures, and some of them were civilizations, and of course the heirs of the Spaniards, and later other nationalities, or Portuguese, and et cetera, who went there and colonized the continent. And their perspective is not so much about climate change out of, you know, as a predominant dimension. Their perspective is about dispossession and reclaiming their heritage. Their perspective is about ecocide. Their perspective is about European multinationals going to Latin America to invest in renewable energies without benefiting the local populations. This is one of the things which is happening, you know. Big European multinational, Spanish multinational in this case, doing a big project of renewable energies in Colombia, and not even taking care of, oh, let's make this benefit the local populations. So it's essentially for them a matter of dispossession, colonization, ecocide. Sorry, not ecocide, ethnocide, the destruction of their cultures. And how do we come back from that, you know? At the same time knowing that it's impossible to bring history back. So we are having, you know, after this conference in Costa Rica, we are having incredible conversations with people from all Latin America, many of them young people, many of them, or most of them women actually, about the fact that it's not for them, of course it's climate change, it's everything else. But first of all, it's about coming back from radical dispossession, having been robbed from their future, from their lands, from their cultures, and how from that collapse, from that side of collapse, what can we learn from them? And I mean, not easy at all. We don't have the responses. We are just initiating the conversations without falling into the trap of how convenient it is to put an indigenous leader at your, in your conference. No, it's not. We're not talking about that. Let's give them really, how can we create the conditions for them to reappropriate their future?
Thank you.
You said that in the Club of Rome you speak with businesses and you collaborate with them. But do you think that the free market economy will help bring about this revolution, this new civilization you spoke about, or will it rather refrain it from happening?
What is the free market economy?
Like the idea that businesses have to compete with one another?
No, I mean, this was a rhetorical question. I mean, because free market economy is a mythical animal that does not exist. It's a beautiful, way of making propaganda of a certain regime of regulating the economy in a certain way and distributing power in a certain way. But there is not such a thing as a free market. That doesn't make even sense. I know I'm being radical in this, but and no, not the point to elaborate now. But regarding the role of businesses and even big businesses, if you can look at the website who is member of the Club of Rome, you can find some people who are the heads of big businesses, big corporations, who are also doing a lot in the space of philanthropy. And the conversations we're having with them is about, so this is a case where I was saying, but don't think that people of the elites are not aware. Plenty of them are aware, and not all of them do as Mr. Hildebrandt, which is, this cynical declaration of, oh, I cannot do anything. And many of them, or at least maybe not many compared to the whole, but many of them are trying, honestly trying to find out what they could do, And with some of them, we are trying to work. So I will mention one particular case, also with an anecdote, because he has told this anecdote many times in public. André Hoffmann is the head of the Hoffmann family, who is still owner of the quarter of the shares of Roche, of the pharmaceutical multinational. And he's at the same time a philanthropist, and his father was an ornithologist, very much concerned about nature conservation. And the first time he became a member of the board of Roche, André asked, what does this company for nature and for the restoration of ecosystems? And the people, the executives in the board, looked at him, what the hell is he asking, And they answered, well, Mr. Hoffmann, this company is here to do profits, and with your share of the profits, you can do whatever you want. So he tells his anecdote as an example of what the companies cannot go on doing. And we actually wrote an article together, which was published by WEF. You can look at that. But his vision is, it's not how you spend the money which matters, it's how you make the money in the first place. Because, philanthropy, you think that the band-aid of philanthropy will fix the issues? Of course not. If you don't introduce the logic of sustainability and regeneration, to be even more ambitious, into the logic of how companies work, you are just pretending you are doing something. So we are having these kind of conversations, which are not easy, because at the same time, these companies are competing in their markets, and it's very clear that I'm not talking only about greenwashing, but because there are companies who are really trying to do something and they realize, oh, but we cannot do more than this, because if we do more than this, we become not competitive, and then we will lose in front of other companies who don't care about sustainability or regeneration, etc. So this is not an equation that the companies by themselves can completely solve. But there is a space, big space for improvement of and change within companies.
Thank you.
Hello. So hello, sir, and thank you for coming. If I understand you well, you're like a supporter of a kind of degrowth opposed to the sustainable growth theory. And I wanted to know if you think that degrowth is necessary nowadays because of the emergency that we're facing, or do you think that even in the 70s, when the Meadows report was published, sustainable growth couldn't have been a solution to the issues and challenges that we're facing since?
So, with all respect, I know quite a few people in the space of degrowth. With all respect, I think the label is not fortunate. Because growth of what? You know, there is a certain, in my view, and we are engaged also in conversations with people from that space, and I learned that Timothée Paric has been here, you know, and we have good conversations with him as well. There is, on one aspect, there is the transformation going from where we are today to readjust the total ecological footprint of humanity to a level which is compatible with the biosphere, with the planet. That requires a lot of degrowth of many things. Basically, degrowth of the ecological footprint by half. I mean, reducing it to half, because we are at the level of 2 planets. You know, we need 2 planets to keep this going right now. But this is distributed, this ecological footprint is distributed in a totally unequal way. And we cannot ignore that. And as I said before, if you reduce inequality, so degrowth of inequality is also something that we are strongly supporting. Because if you reduce inequality, the possibility of achieving this compatibility between human well-being and planetary boundaries is much easier. But it depends of what. Growth or degrowth depends on what. We have to make degrow massively the industry of fossil fuels. And when I said the label is not fortunate, it's because it's a bit depressing, you know. I mean, for people in general, if the future we propose is degrowth, they can interpret that as, oh my God, we are doomed, you know. I mean, it's difficult that, politically speaking, that label can become popular. So this is part of our critique, you know, and also that we need to combine the degrowth here to growth elsewhere. But in general, we have to change what we understand by human development and introduce well-being economics that looks already, which shares with degrowth a lot of the diagnostics and the analysis, but that sounds already something quite different.
But in the 70s, what would have been the solution to not arrive at what we're facing today? Would it be like what we would say is sustainable growth, like continue having more and more money in infrastructures everywhere in a sustainable way, or just stopping this unlimited growth of economy, like the growth theory asks for?
Well, rewrite the history is a bit, I mean, can be interesting, you know, but a number of the, I mean, the narrowing of, as I said before, you know, the narrowing of economics and economic theory to just a mainstream which became much more dogmatic than it was. So we haven't explored, still today, we haven't explored the ideas of so many schools of thought in economics. Explored in a practical way, you know, with concrete examples. Ecological economics, you know, feminist economics, all that. There was, in the 70s, a much wider tolerance to a diversity of ideas and experimentation than today. What happened in the middle, I mean, we are very critical about the evolution of economics in the direction of what is wrongly called neoliberalism, you know, which is wrongly called because it's not new and it's not liberal, but but that created the mechanisms to make inequality go up so fast, and created the mechanism also for the hyper-financialization of the economy, so that the you know, the compensation for the inequality was, but don't worry, you will get a loan from your bank to buy this or that, you know. So that dominated completely the space of economics, and that prevented the exploration of other perspectives which exist and which are practiced, but at small scale, some places, etc. You know.
We'll take one last question. Okay.
I'll just put on a slide that you wanted to show us.
You wanted to show a slide. Here it is.
So this slide is the sort of the synthesis of course, a simplistic synthesis. You know, I mean, don't get it wrong. It's not that everything is in it, but a lot is in this slide, because we have here the dots are countries. This is the Human Development Index, which is developed by the UN, and it's a combination of GDP per capita and health and education indicators. It can be criticized, you know, but at least it's a bit more sophisticated than just GDP per capita, you know. And then on the other axis, it's the ecological footprint, a concept developed by two colleagues in the Club of Rome, Bill Rees and Matthijs Wackernagel. And here represented in number of Earths that we need to sustain our lifestyle. So basically, the average, the global ecological footprint is around 2 planets, while we only have 1. And all the countries should be in this quadrant. Oops, sorry. I don't know why the quadrant in green moved, but basically it's, you see, it's 1 planet and high levels of Human Development Index. So all the countries should be within that quadrant. None of them are. Some of them are close, quite close. Those are in the, you know, that you have in the middle, which are not the ones we are looking at as models, right? And I'm not saying they are models. In many aspects, probably they are not. But it's interesting to see that they are achieving relatively high levels of Human Development Index with low levels of ecological footprint, or with levels of ecological footprint which are compatible with the fact that we have only 1 planet. And so the Western countries are all, you know, very high, high or very high, 3, 4 planets, not to say 8. I think the 8 is the US up there. and countries in Africa are all here, yeah, compatible with the planet, but low levels of Human Development Index. So the trajectory of countries should be for these to come into the quadrant, for those to reduce their ecological footprint and come also into the quadrant. And, sorry to say, this is not the trajectory of countries, because of course these moves, I mean, every year, you know, these, the dots have moved. So if you took, for instance, China has made a huge shift in HDI to higher HDIs, but also increased substantially its ecological footprint. And this graph synthesizes in a very simplistic way, two things: inequality, very clear, totally inequality. This is why we started using 2 years ago the lemma global equity for a healthy planet. Global equity for a healthy planet. The health of the planet depends on our levels of equity. And it also summarizes the fact that the paths of development, and I said development, not growth or degrowth, of the different countries have to be completely different from each other, you know. Lowering ecological footprint for countries in Europe and North America, increasing their HDI without increasing much their ecological footprint in most of the world.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. We are particularly proud to end this year's Earth Week on such a global perspective, giving hope for an enhanced human well-being in a healthier ecosystem, as your mission states it. Before our first conference this week, Hortense, our president, announced an inspiring moment, and I believe we've done it. You've given us a glimpse of light, as you said. And through our conferences, workshops, and other events, we have tried to show how all the good that can emerge from trying to tackle the social and environmental challenges ahead. So let's keep thinking, imagining, reinventing, and thank you again, Mr. Alvarez Pereira, for sharing your insights with us tonight.
Thank you to you and to all of you. Thank you to you for inviting and for all of you for being present. It was a very good moment, very pleasant. Thank you.
And for those who want, we are holding a little cocktail just afterwards, so don't hesitate to stay and.
Je vous en prie.
Merci.
Non, non, pour moi aussi, c'est très bien. Une question un peu bonne.
Oui. Celle du public était particulièrement bien.
Oui, oui.
Parfait.